Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel and to my September wrap-up. I read 5 books in September, which is one of my better reading months quantity-wise, but also I didn't dislike any of the books that I read this month either. Like, there were some kind of middle-of-the-road mediocre books, but there weren't any that I disliked, so quality-wise this was also a pretty good reading month. So let's not waste any more time and let's just jump right into it. The first book I finished in September was The Princess Diaries by Carrie Fisher. This is actually my 4th time reading this book, and it was my 3rd time listening to the audiobook, which is my favorite way to listen to this book because it's narrated by Carrie Fisher, who is just amazing. I've talked about this book so many times before on my channel, so I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but obviously this is a memoir about Carrie Fisher, specifically her time filming the Star Wars films, more specifically her relationship or affair with Harrison Ford while filming A New Hope. So I obviously gave this 5 out of 5 stars again. This is one of my all-time favorite books, and it's getting up there with one of my most reread books. I think Alice in Wonderland still holds the top spot with 5 or 6 rereads of it, but this one is coming in second. So yeah, I would highly recommend this. Absolutely love it, as always. And sticking with Star Wars memoirs, we also have I Am C-3PO by Anthony Daniels. Not Anthony Daniels, which is how I pronounced it in one of my other videos, but he specifically pointed out in this book how coming over to America, he thought it was interesting how people pronounced his name as Anthony when over in the UK it would be pronounced Anthony. So yes, he obviously played C-3PO in all of the Star Wars movies. I think he is the only actor to have appeared in pretty much all of the films as C-3PO. So this is his memoir. Again, it specifically focuses on his times filming the different Star Wars movies, and I ended up giving this 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. I can't remember exactly which. I feel like I probably would have enjoyed this more had I listened to the audiobook, which I did request from my Overdrive app, but they still haven't gotten it in. I can't even request to hold it because they don't even have a copy of it available. So I think I would have enjoyed it a bit more listening to the audiobook because I did find this a little bit boring at times. So I think listening to the audiobook at a faster speed, it would have held my attention a little bit more, and the writing didn't always flow when I was reading it, with it being narrated by Anthony Daniels. Again, I think I would have been better because it would have flowed exactly the way that he intended it to be written, if that makes sense. Another thing that I kind of had an issue with in this book is that there were some things that I learned about that I did not know previously, such as the fact that this actor did not get along with the actor that played R2-D2, and he mentioned in this book that there were some things that that actor had said that had been hurtful towards him. So I ended up Googling it, and that's not what this video is about, so if you want to Google it and form an opinion for yourself, you can do that. But after reading about what that actor said about working with Anthony Daniels and the way that he writes about himself in this book and the way that he talks about some of the other actors that he worked with or directors or whoever, I did get a vibe of I'm a bit better than everybody else, and I'm not gonna lie, that did rub me the wrong way. But that was just my personal opinion and my personal take on what I got from this book. Obviously, I don't know him as a person, I didn't work with him, but just the way that he wrote about some other people, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way sometimes. So that is my personal opinion about this book. Also in September, I picked up The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. This is an adult mystery book in which we're following our main character called Shay, who something happened to her when she was a child that has caused her to be kind of paranoid about certain things in her adult life, and has also kind of made her obsessed with true crime, and she's a true crime blogger in her spare time, but as her job, she is a receptionist at a doctor's office. And one day, a woman walks into the doctor's office who she recognizes straight away as being this woman called Beth, who back in the 70s was accused of murdering 2 men, but she was acquitted for the murders. But there's always kind of been speculation that maybe she got away with it because nobody else was ever found guilty, and it has kind of remained an unsolved murder case all of these years. So Shay really wants to interview Beth and kind of find out, did she murder these 2 guys or not? Did she get away with it, or was she innocent the whole time? And Beth actually agrees to let Shay interview her and talk to her, which is very strange because Beth didn't really talk about it at all since the 70s when she was acquitted for the murders. So that's kind of its own mystery on its own of why Beth is now wanting to talk about it after not speaking about it for all these years. And then there's of course also the mystery of, did she kill these two men or not, and if not, then who did? So I had very high hopes going into this book because this author also wrote the book The Sundown Motel, which is one that I still do think I want to pick up, but I heard so many great things about that book, so I was really looking forward to this one and I had a lot of high hopes for it. Unfortunately, I ended up giving it like 3.5 out of 5 stars, which isn't a bad rating by any means. I did enjoy this book. Like, I was interested throughout the whole thing. It kept my attention throughout the whole thing, so I did really enjoy it, but it was a little bit underwhelming at times, and I guess it just didn't really bring anything new to the table for me. Like, the twists and the reveals and stuff like that wasn't anything that's gonna like blow your mind. And there was also, which this is completely personal preference, but there is an element in the story that isn't really mentioned in the synopsis, so I can't tell you what it is because it would probably be a spoiler, but it just was this element in the story that for me made it too convenient at times, and I think that's also what kind of took away from the reveals and the twists from being more impressive, was because it had this element in it that I don't personally like. But again, that's all like personal preference. But for me, this airs more on the side of being a mystery book than a thriller. I think these days I'm a bit more into like the thrillers and the edge of your seats and the big twists and turns and reveals and stuff like that, and this book just didn't quite do it for me, but I still did enjoy my time reading it. Like I said, like 3.5 is not a bad rating by any means. It still kept my attention throughout the whole book. I really enjoyed her writing, so I do think I'm still going to pick up The Sundown Motel at some point because that one still really intrigues me as well. And then the last two books I have to talk about are both graphic novels. The first one is Stranger Things Into the Fire. I believe this is the third book in the Stranger Things graphic novel series, which I know I had mentioned previously that I wasn't reading them in order and that I didn't think that you had to, but I will say this mentions characters and features characters and references things that happen in the second graphic novel, which luckily I had read. So I take back what I said before. I do think you have to read this in order, at least for like this storyline that we're talking about, in order to fully understand what is happening. So this is another book that I only ended up giving 3 out of 5 stars because it just didn't have the most interesting storyline for me, and we mainly followed characters that aren't featured in the TV show, like they're strictly from the comics, so I didn't personally have a lot of investment in those characters. And we also have this main character on the cover, which I don't know why she's like the main focus of this cover, because she was a very small portion of this book, so I feel like they're kind of doing this comic a disservice by having her be like the main face of this book, because I know her storyline in the TV series was not well received by the audiences, including myself. Like, I wasn't really interested in her plotline of the story, but she is a very small part of this actual comic. But yeah, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was fine. I will say Steve Harrington is in like the last 5 to 10 pages of this book, and that made up for all the rest of it. So if you want to pick it up just for that reason, because yeah, anyways, moving on. The final book that I picked up in September was probably one of my favorite books that I read this month, besides obviously The Princess Diaries, which is a reread, so technically it doesn't count, but that is Beautiful Darkness. This is a lovely but disturbing graphic novel. This is an anti-fairy tale, and it is made up of these beautiful watercolors. I did a post about this on my Instagram, and I said that creepy has never looked so cute, and genuinely that's like how to sum up this book. So essentially, at the beginning of this book, we're following these little characters, and we're following this girl called Aurora. She's like the princess of the story, and she's having tea with her like Prince Charming, and then suddenly the ceiling and everything around them starts dripping red, and then they start kind of running around frantically, and then you realize that they are kind of coming out of the body of this dead girl. And now we're watching all of these little like cutesy characters as they are in the wilderness for the first time, and they're very tiny, so they're like the size of grass, and there are these like giant animals and stuff around them, and we watch as they kind of turn on each other to survive the wilderness, or sometimes for no reason at all. And there are just some very disturbing things that happen in this book, but it's made up of these beautiful watercolor drawings, so it's so visually appealing to read, but it's also just very gory and disturbing. But I absolutely loved it. So I think I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like, graphic novels, I feel like I can never rate them a 5 because they're just not on the same level as some like novels that I read, but this is pretty much like a 5-star read for me. I will say, obviously we're talking about death and disturbing things, so trigger warnings for things like that. It's a graphic novel, so it's not just gore that is written, it's like on the page. And I will say the only thing that did kind of bother me about this book, which is purely personal preference, is that there is some like animal related gore and things like that, like harming of animals, that I don't even like to read about in books, but seeing it kind of on the page, even though it's, you know, cartoony or whatever, it is a little bit upsetting for me. Like, that always kind of bothers me, so just be aware of that before picking this book up, that it's not just like your average everyday gore and death, but there's also some like little animal critters that are harmed in the making of said story. But overall, I super enjoy this and would highly recommend it if you want a disturbing graphic novel to read for Halloween season. So those are all of the books that I picked up in September. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. I'd love to discuss them with you in the comments. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!